Hey, welcome to The Explainer, where we try to make sense of big ideas. Today, we're jumping into something pretty intense, a 2,000-year-old letter, where a leader, the Apostle Paul, is basically defending his entire life's work to a community he founded, a community that was now questioning everything about him. So let's kick things off with a question that's just as relevant now as it was then. When you're looking at a leader and their credibility is on the line, when their reality doesn't seem to match their rhetoric, what's the real proof of their integrity? Well, this is exactly the mess the Apostle Paul found himself in. His relationship with the church in Corinth, it was totally fractured. They were doubting his authority, his motives, and even the message he was preaching. See, he was trying to defend his ministry, but for the folks in Corinth, all his suffering, well, that didn't look like success. It didn't look like what a God-appointed apostle should be going through. It created this huge credibility gap. He's saying one thing, but to them, his life looked a lot like failure.
So how does Paul respond? You might expect him to come out swinging, listing his achievements, right? Nope. He starts not with a power play, but with a plea for reconciliation. And he argues it's a two-way street.
He basically says, look, getting right with God, that's the vertical part, is only half the story. It has to be horizontal too, between people. You can't just claim you're good with God if you're at odds with everyone in your community.
And here's where he really drives the point home. He says, essentially, if you reject me, God's messenger, just because you don't like my circumstances or my personality, you're basically taking God's grace and throwing it in the trash. Whoa, that's a bold claim, right? He's directly linking their relationship with him to their relationship with God.
Okay, and this is where Paul totally flips the script. This is the wild part. To prove he's the real deal, what does he do? He doesn't pull out a list of his greatest hits. He pulls out a list of his greatest sufferings. Just look at this list. He talks about endurance, hardships, beatings, being thrown in jail, you name it. And he's not listing these as failures. He's saying, this right here, this is my resume. This is the platform where God's power was put on full display through me. And then he lays out his case with this series of mind-bending paradoxes that just completely challenge how we think about strength and success. First up, he's seen as dying, but look, he's alive. He's basically saying his survival isn't just luck. It's proof that he's on a divine mission. Yeah, he gets punished, but he's never actually taken out. This one's all about his inner state versus his outer world. I mean, everything on the outside is telling him to be miserable, but on the inside, he's rejoicing. It just doesn't add up, right? And this one just brilliantly nails his whole value system. He might be poor in his pocket, but his entire mission is about making other people rich in spirit. It's a direct shot at anyone thinking a successful ministry has to be a rich one. Okay, so after laying out this incredible case for his authenticity through suffering, Paul kind of shifts gears. He uses that as a foundation to build to one of his most debated and frankly most controversial commands. And this one is all about identity. He says, do not be mismatched with unbelievers. Now, the original language talks about being unequally yoked, which is an old farming term. And let's just say it's caused a lot of confusion and debate over the years. But here's the key insight from Dr. Adewuya's analysis. Paul isn't telling them to become hermits. He's not calling for them to just isolate themselves from the rest of the world. No, this isn't about isolation. It's about identity. So what's he saying? He's calling the community, the group of believers, a temple of God. Now think about that. What makes a temple special? It's not the stones or the wood. It's the fact that God's presence is there. So Paul's telling them, you guys, as a group, are different. Your whole identity, your values, your entire way of looking at the world is supposed to be fundamentally different from the culture around you. And this brings us full circle right back to where we started, that credibility gap, the space between what you say you believe and how you actually live your life. To really drive this home, Dr. Adewuya tells this incredibly powerful story. There's this pastor, and he takes his young son with him to the barber shop. You know the kind of place. Lots of chatter, maybe some off-color jokes flying around. And the whole time, the son is just silent, watching. So when they leave, the dad asks his son what was on his mind. And the boy's response is just, wow. He says, I have seen my father in the pulpit. I wanted to see my father in the barber shop. Think about that. The kid wasn't just listening to the sermons. He was watching to see if his dad's life matched his words in the real world. And that's the whole lesson in a nutshell, isn't it? Real authenticity isn't about making the gospel fit conveniently into your life.
It's about making your life fit the gospel. You don't bend your beliefs to match your behavior, you shape your behavior to match your beliefs. So, for the Apostle Paul, this was it. The ultimate proof of his ministry wasn't some miracle or a fancy speech. It was the fact that his life and his message were inseparable. His suffering, his joy, all of it. That was his most powerful argument. There was simply no gap between his life and his lips. And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? In our world today, where we're constantly broadcasting what we believe online, what does it truly mean for our actions to speak louder than our words? How do we make sure our own lives, in the pulpit and in the barbershop, actually line up?